Hello and welcome to this webinar on avian influenza for commercial poultry keepers. My name is Gonzalo Sanchez. I work for Christine Middlemes for the UK CBO as her Chief of Staff. Today we are going to run through some practical biosecurity measures as we are now confronted by the largest avian influenza outbreak we have had in decades. So we'll go through a little bit of the latest picture by our policy colleagues. We will talk about essential practical biosecurity measures that you can and you must take and to stop the spread of the disease and to try to get your birds free from disease. And then we will provide you with contact details and further information. A plea for me is that that you spread this word with your colleagues and people that you know that are keeping birds. So without any more hesitation, I'm going to pass to my colleague Lara from the policy team. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much, Gonzalo. And thank you very much to everyone for attending today's webinar. My name is Dr. Lara Harrop and I'm one of the policy team leads from the Defra Exotic Disease Control team. I'm going to kick off today's webinar by giving an overview of what the latest situation is regarding cases of avian influenza, which is commonly known as bird flu, and what preventative control measures have been put in place nationally to help stop the spread of bird flu. I'll follow this up then with a short 101 on what bird flu is, how it is spread, and why your birds could be at risk, before passing over to my veterinary and epidemiology colleagues who will discuss how good biosecurity can be practically implemented on the ground to help you protect your birds, your businesses and the jobs within those businesses, and what to do if you suspect bird flu in your birds. So the UK is currently experiencing its largest ever outbreak of avian influenza. And since the first case of avian influenza in this outbreak was detected in England on the 26th of October 2021, up to the point this webinar was recorded on the 7th of January 2023, 77 cases of avian influenza in poultry or other captive birds have been detected. With 64 of these cases confirmed in England, 5 in Scotland, 3 in Wales and 5 in Northern Ireland. So the outbreak is affecting all 4 administrations of the UK. There have also been multiple findings of avian influenza in wild birds from sites across GB. As this is a rapidly developing situation, for the latest updates on confirmed cases and guidance, please see gov.uk/bird flu. The location of disease control zones surrounding infected premises, where additional control measures apply to bird keepers, can be viewed from the Animal and Plant Health Agency's interactive disease map. And this is available via gov.uk/bird flu. Links to all the resources any of the speakers today flag up will be flagged at the end of this webinar and also in the associated FAQ documents. So to put this winter's outbreak in scale of previous outbreaks, over winter in 2020-2021, 26 cases of avian influenza were confirmed in the UK. And over winter in 2016-2017, just 13 cases were confirmed, despite these outbreaks previously being considered large outbreaks with substantial impacts on bird keepers. So what's being done to prevent the spread of avian influenza nationally? Following the first cases of avian influenza and escalating numbers of findings of avian influenza in wild birds, an avian influenza prevention zone came into force across Great Britain on the 3rd of November 2021 and in Northern Ireland on the 17th of November 2021. This was supplemented by additional housing measures in force across the UK from the 29th of November 2021. But what does this mean on the ground? It means it's a legal requirement to keep all birds indoors and follow strict biosecurity measures in order to limit the spread and eradicate the disease from the UK's poultry and captive bird population. Next slide, please. So what is bird flu? It's a highly contagious viral disease caused by the avian influenza virus. It primarily affects birds, but it can also affect humans and other mammals. Before I move on to how avian influenza is spread, I just want to run through a few aspects of the terminology that help describe avian influenzas. Viruses consist of proteins, and avian influenza viruses are classified according to their H and N proteins. There are 16 different H proteins and 9 different N proteins in influenzas affecting birds, and any combination of these is possible. But from an animal health perspective, the H5s and the H7s are considered the most important for animal health perspective, and these are the notifiable avian influenzas from a statutory perspective. All avian influenza cases in the UK this winter have been of a European H5N1 strain of avian influenza. This European H5N1 strain is highly contagious for birds, but the UK Health Security Agency advised the risk to the general public's health is very low. Food Standards Agency advised there is a very low food safety risk for UK consumers, and properly cooked poultry and poultry products, including eggs, are safe to eat. This is important to note as there has been historic cases globally of an Asian strain of H5N1 that did have increased public health concerns. However, as a precautionary approach, this precautionary approach is always taken by regional public health protection teams for people who have come into either very close contact and/or prolonged contact with infected birds. Next slide, please. The one other principal characterisation we use for avian influenzas is their ability to cause severe disease, with strains classified as either highly pathogenic avian influenza, which can cause severe disease and is often fatal in susceptible birds, or low pathogenic avian influenza, which generally causes mild disease or no disease at all, and are typically associated with clinical signs such as mild to moderate respiratory symptoms, drops in egg productions, or secondary infections. This emphasises an importance of record keeping, which my colleagues will touch on later in today's webinar, in order to support the close monitoring the health of your birds for any changes. However, clinical signs can and do vary between species of birds, and despite low pathogenic avian influenza having a more limited impact on the health of birds, in most cases, that is, than high pathogenic avian influenza, low pathogenic avian influenza can turn into high pathogenic avian influenza if it gets into a flock and starts to spread. So our key message here is if you have any concerns regarding the health of your birds, to contact your vet. And if you suspect any type of avian influenza in poultry or other captive birds, you or your vet must report it immediately to the Animal and Plant Health Agency. Next slide, please. But how does bird flu spread? A bird flu outbreak can occur at any time point in the year. However, there is a seasonal increase in the risk of a bird flu outbreak associated with the winter migration patterns of wild birds, and these are often migratory waterfowl. But the risk is not just where those migratory wild birds are. Infected migratory wild birds can go on to infect local sedentary wild bird species, poultry or other captive birds, and this results in a local transmission cycle being developed. The virus can be transmitted directly between birds or indirectly by birds coming into contact with environmental contamination. This includes feces and feathers from infected birds. But what can you do to protect your birds? High standards of biosecurity should be maintained as good practice for the health of your birds, as good biosecurity is an essential defence against diseases such as avian influenza and is key to limiting the spread of avian influenza and outbreak. But this must be coupled with vigilance and keeping a close watch on your birds for any signs of disease and seeking prompt advice from a vet if you have any concerns. Now I'm going to pass on to epidemiology colleagues who are just going to run through some of how this biosecurity can be implemented practically on the ground to help you protect your birds, your businesses and jobs within those businesses and stop the spread of avian influenza.
Hello everyone, my name is Andy Patterson. I'm the head of the National Emergency Epidemiology Group and the Field Epidemiology team. Our job is to investigate the outbreaks of exotic disease in Great Britain, and a lot of our work is aimed at biosecurity and disease investigation. So I'll start with just a general summary of the outbreak that we experienced last year and some of the more recent findings from the current outbreak. So if we go back to the last season's outbreak, all of the infected premises last year were attributed to either direct or indirect contact with wild birds. So that was either direct contact, where you had, for example, a pond in a free range unit within the ranges, and the birds were literally getting, beak to beak contact in the ranges, or potentially wild birds that were getting introduced to the buildings, or indirect contact through bedding, fecal contamination of clothing, fecal contamination of feed, all those sorts of routes. Now, importantly, there was no evidence of long distance spread between premises, so we weren't getting spread from sort of Lincolnshire to Yorkshire, but we did experience spread between premises where these were located close together and were essentially part of the same business. And it was clear when this happened that where there was biosecurity within the business, but it just wasn't effective. So from our point of view, it's frustrating that very often when we investigate disease outbreaks, we find that the different components for biosecurity are present, but they're just not done sufficiently well to be effective. So you have, for example, cleansing and disinfection facilities that are poorly maintained, or they don't contain any ability to wash, but they have disinfectant sprayers. They're used inconsistently, so some staff use them, some don't. There's no discipline there. There's no records kept of visitors, or there's no record of production or mortality, and either none at all, or there's none in the right format that we can use. So that's just a little overview of what we got last year. And now if we look at really what we're talking about now, and I'd like to emphasize that the biosecurity we're talking about is not rocket science. We're not asking you to do anything that requires a lot of science. It's basically good practice, and we need you to follow good practice and do it well. Now, what I'm going to talk about is based on our findings that we've brought together. We have a system called Verdo, where we store and analyze all our disease investigations, and this has identified particular risk factors that are important. So the other important thing for me to say is that we're not expecting gold-plated standards. We're not expecting you to have the types of biosecurity that we would have at our laboratories, but I'd like you to keep in mind some of the lessons that we've all learned about COVID, and especially how small the dose of virus is needed to cause an outbreak. What you've got there is within your business is a huge numbers of highly susceptible birds, and you only need to introduce sufficient virus to one of them for it to become infected, become infectious, and then pass it on to the other birds. So it's really important that you bear in mind that even with most of this is fecal contamination is the source of the virus. It's not respiratory virus as such. It's fecal contamination, and you eat any bird feces, each individual bird feces will contain hundreds of doses of infectious virus, so that it doesn't take very much to spread it. And it's really important, therefore, that you keep that infection away from your birds. And we'll talk about it later, but don't rely on the hard outer shell for your building, the perimeter fence, the gate, the locked gate with cleansing and disinfection. Your hard outer shell needs to be on the individual buildings, and we'll talk about that in some detail in a moment. And it's also important to do biosecurity all the time, not just when it's bird flu season, because bird flu season can start earlier and finish later than some years. And it's best if it becomes part of the culture of your business, so that it becomes a routine thing. I mean, many of you will remember when health and safety was just something that very few people did and was almost a joke. And now health and safety is something that is an integral part of any commercial business. Now, biosecurity needs to become that sort of a mindset where it's just one of those things that is a key part of your business. And also bear in mind that anything you do to prevent or reduce the likelihood of an exotic disease outbreak will also reduce the likelihood of you introducing endemic diseases such as Salmonella. And so that's bound to be good for your business. Now, because we're talking to you all as commercial poultry keepers today, something that's very close to your heart when you are either caught in a surveillance or protection zone or you have an outbreak yourself is licensing. It's key to minimizing the impact on your business. It's never a good thing to have a disease or to be within a zone, but it's possible to minimize that impact. And bear in mind that licensing it's not something you get as of right. It isn't just a piece of paper that you phone up and just get given. It's a license is something that permits you to do something that is otherwise illegal under the circumstances you're under. So being granted that license, your biosecurity is key to you satisfying the licensing conditions, and it depends on being able to provide the evidence and build the trust that we need to show that you can meet the license conditions. So you need to have good records, you need to have good procedures on your farm, and they need to be accessible and visible to us. And then these are put into a risk assessment, and from that the decision is made as to whether what you're proposing to do, it is possible to license it. So, in short, there's no easy answers to biosecurity. It requires a lot of effort. You're not going to reduce the likelihood of getting a disease outbreak just by tinkering at the edges, buying a couple of disinfectant sprayers and some foot dips. You need to make biosecurity part of the culture of the business and the way you manage, right from the managing director down. Now, the particular key issues that we've identified are listed here, and I'll just go through them briefly. So we talked about the perimeter biosecurity. You need to move your mindset. It's obviously good to have good perimeter biosecurity, fencing, gates, etc., disinfection, but you need to move away from that and make your hard perimeter that you need to really defend is the entry to the sheds, because nearly all the infection is walked in through the shed door or comes in through the roof or comes in with bedding and things like this. So it's really important that you make sure that any visit to inside the shed to contact with birds is carried out in a biosecure manner. Now, one of the key risks is bedding, and it's really important that you manage your bedding correctly. You need to keep it stored under cover, ideally away from wild birds. It needs to be double wrapped, and you need to, when you move it out of the sheds from storage and move it into contact with your birds, you should be unwrapping the outer wrapping, cleansing and disinfecting what's there, moving it into the shed in a biosecure manner. So any vehicles you use to move it, or trolleys, for example, you should be cleansing, disinfecting them, because otherwise, you are going to be moving infection on the surrounding ground around your buildings into the shed and into either direct contact with the birds or just contaminating the bedding that's already there, and then those birds come in contact with that. Even if you have lots of concrete around your buildings, which is a good thing to have from the disease control point of view, it will be covered in bird feces. You may not even be able to see them, but there's potentially a lot of virus there. And if you walk across it or move vehicles across it, you'll pick it up on your boots or on the tires of the vehicles, and that will get introduced into the building. And again, bear in mind the very small dose that you will need. If you have bedding stored outside, it becomes fecal contaminated and it has holes in it. That water that accumulates on the plastic is just like a viral soup, and that will drain through into the bedding, and that will become infected, and that will become infectious to your birds when you introduce it to the shed. Now, some production systems use a lot of bedding, and we would encourage you, if you have the capacity, to move the bedding in at the beginning of the production cycle so you don't have to top up. We find a number of outbreaks linked to topping up bedding, and also last year we saw a number of outbreaks linked to using bale shredders to spread the bedding around where you're using large quantities, and they were creating huge aerosol spread of contaminated infection through contaminated bedding, and we were getting explosive outbreaks in these sheds, which is an unusual feature. But the only way we could explain that large introduction of infection was through the use of the bale machines to disperse the bedding and the infection. Building maintenance is always coming up as an issue. It's really important that the building doesn't allow leaks in from the roof. So if you've got bird feces on the roof and you have water leaking in, it's washing potentially contaminated bird feces down into the building. And we've seen infected premises where the infection has spread outwards on the floor from the leaking roof, and the mortality pattern follows progressive spread up and down the shed from the place where we find a leak when we do the investigation. So really important to prevent leakage in. Similarly, things like keeping doors shut, We had one outbreak that progressed from one end of the shed where there was a door that was being blown open when the fan switched on, and the birds were escaping into the vestibule area, becoming infected from the contamination in that area, bringing it back into the shed, and then that spread up the building. So just general good maintenance, trying to keep wild birds out, trying to keep rodents out. We know that rodents are a risk factor for salmonella introduction, and we know they're also a risk factor for introducing bird flu as well, through indirect contact. If they bring it in the same way that you will bring it in on your boots. Okay, location. Now, it's often not possible to change the location of a business. They've developed in an area over many years, but it really isn't a good idea to be near coastal wetlands, under migration routes, close to lakes and gravel pits. Anything that attracts wild birds is not a good idea for your business, and essentially you're trying to set a business up in what is a high crime area for disease outbreaks. So that's something to bear in mind. The other important point is this thing about culture of biosecurity, really the making it part of everything you do, being seen to do biosecurity well, making sure that it is clear that the management value biosecurity and do it themselves. Don't rely on the fact as a senior manager that you have got standard operating procedures for your business that describe biosecurity. Go out there and check to see if they're actually being done, whether these boot dips are being maintained, they've got disinfectant in them at the right level, that there is actually cleansing possible as well as disinfection at entry points, that there is there is shed specific PPE and boots, etc. So that it's important that it becomes a routine part of the business, and that you as a manager are seen to be doing it too. So you're recording in visitor books, you're being seen to do it. But when our veterinary inspectors turn up at a business, we don't only expect them to cleanse and disinfect thoroughly, put on completely new PPE. We expect them to be seen to be doing it. So it's not just the fact that you asked it to be done. When you're there, you show that it's important because you do it yourself. And it's a bit like with COVID. If you wear a mask, you're not just protecting yourself, you're making a statement that says, I think it's important to protect myself. I'm wearing a mask. I expect you to wear a mask too. So it's really important from the sort of sociological point of view to help embed biosecurity in your business. Record keeping. Now, record keeping is really important to us. It helps us determine the likely times when infection has either entered your business or has left your business to infect somewhere else. It is, we're looking for production records, egg production, mortality, water consumption, feed consumption, medicine records, and we need these in an accessible format, something that we can access quickly, that is easily legible. I mean, ideally in an electronic spreadsheet format, bits of paper stuck to walls, whiteboards, they don't really help. One of the things you'll be looking for is a rapid response from us, and there isn't really a rapid response possible where we're having to transcribe large amounts of very illegible data off a piece of paper that's been sitting in a book for a long time. It really is very beneficial for both parties to keep good record keeping. Have visitors book that record the movement of all staff and visitors to the business. We've been quite surprised by the number of businesses that cannot accurately describe which staff were on which premises on which day, or can prove that staff are clearly identified with one premises only and only ever service that one premises. Just moving on to cleansing and disinfection. The point here really is, there's no point in just spraying disinfectant around. If you're not cleansing, then mud and organic matter inactivate many disinfectants, and they also physically shield the virus from contact with the disinfectant. So it's really important that you effectively clean anything and then disinfect it. When we talk about PPE discipline, the real solution is to have shed specific PPE that's not worn outside and is not moved between buildings, and especially between sites. That is a major risk mitigation for your business. We talked about the virus again. Even if you have lots of concrete around, the virus can survive for weeks in that sort of environment, especially over the winter. The big enemies for viruses are ultraviolet light, drying out, heat. They're the things that will kill it. Being really cold does not kill the virus. In fact, we specifically freeze viruses in our laboratories to preserve them for a long period of time. So there seems to be this misunderstanding that having a really cold winter is good to kill viruses. It's exactly the opposite. Flooding has been a major risk factor in quite a number of IPs. Just routine flooding. There are some buildings are in areas where surface flooding is common and water washes into the buildings. This really is a serious flaw for disease control, and we were quite surprised by how many businesses told us that they just splash a bit of Aircon around when they've had a flood and hope that that'll be okay. You know, that's more or less a disease emergency. You're basically washing all this fecal contamination in from outside and bringing it into contact with your birds. So you need to try and prevent flooding rather than dealing with it after it's happened. We've talked about ponds on site. We know this is complicated, that there are planning considerations, there are environmental considerations about having ponds available. You need to make them uninviting for wildlife, if necessary, net them so that wild birds aren't encouraged to come to them. Because if you're bringing those birds in close contact with your birds, you're much more likely to introduce infection, either directly or indirectly, because of the contact of staff and equipment with those wild birds as well. And again, vehicles, restrict access from vehicles. They will bring infection on in wheel arches and on tires and things like that. So again, it's really important that you keep minimize the access and have effective C&D. When we consider premises under the same management, it's really important that you ensure that they are operating separately from the point of view of biosecurity, because we've seen a number of outbreaks now where premises under the same management, just because of business pressures, sharing of staff, sharing of equipment, things that happen only occasionally, but seem to have been the point at which infection was spread around the business. Equally, if you do have an integrated business with premises close together and under the same management, do keep records as to what equipment, staff, birds, etc. are being moved around and when, because it will help us much better understand your business, and if at all possible, it'll help us to put particular sites under restriction and maybe manage them without culling them out or considering them dangerous contacts. But we can't do that without evidence to show they are truly separate. Finally, moving on to co-location of infrastructure. Now, it's really important that as part of biosecurity, you consider the resilience of your business. Now, again, we know that businesses grow organically and they aren't planned in some great forward-thinking plan. And it's very convenient to have your business all on one site. But how are you going to manage your business if you become an IP and one part of your business with your feed mill or your hatchery or your egg packing station is on the same site and arguably not separate? So you've got to think about that. And we'd recommend any business to carry out contingency planning and say, what if I become an IP? How will that be handled? What impact will it have on me? And certainly the EPI team have helped a number of businesses with exercises and advice about contingency planning, helping you to understand our world, what makes you a high-risk contact and what defends you from being a high-risk contact. We would certainly be able to help with things like that. Equally, from a legal sort of administrative point of view, your choice of CPHs, managing your business all under one CPH. I agree, again, this is a very complex issue, but it can be important to have separate CPHs that allow you to define the separate parts of the business from a legal point of view. And final section was on licensing, but we've talked about licensing, and I'll close there and hand over to the next speaker.
Hello everyone, my name is Christian Chulik. I'm one of the senior veterinary inspectors based on the southeast of England, one of the most fortunate regions in the current outbreaks. I'm going to talk you through a few aspects from the APHA field review point of view when we're dealing with avian influenza, and I'm going to start with what happens when suspicion of disease is reported. Well, owners, private vets, official veterinarians in laboratory are the most frequent sources of reports, and across small holding flocks to multi-shed and multi-site enterprises, the principles of APHA response is the same. As a poultry keeper, once you identify any of the main clinical signs that were presented previously in your birds, we encourage to call the APHA single point of contact number. And then you have selection, you have option 1, you can select, which has been specifically implemented to report suspicion of avian influenza. Therefore, you're not going to be holding on the line to be put through one of our operators. In the case of your private vet reporting the suspicion, that is regarded as a consultation case, which implies that the APHA will liaise with your vet to gather information about the history of disease and details of the premises where disease is suspected. You will be put through a customer advised duty vet that will take the details of your premises and details of the clinical situation and what made you suspect avian influenza. He will make an assessment, and if that initial assessment concludes that notifiable disease cannot be ruled out, he will put verbal restrictions on the premises. He will then call a regional veterinary officer within the geographical area where you are located, and then the vet will be deployed within 30 minutes from the notification being made. Once arrived on farm, following the biosecurity protocols that APHA has, or if you think that you have higher standards on biosecurity protocol, we are happy to follow yours. There will be formal restrictions placed on the premises, and then the veterinary investigation will commence. This investigation includes clinical inspection and/or examination of the birds, and possibly sampling whilst adhering to strict biosecurity. Also, data will be gathered, including disease history, movements on and off the premises of any animals, feed, bedding, information about people attending the birds, and the levels of their involvement. After this thorough investigation being carried out, there could be two outcomes. Either the disease can be ruled out by the veterinary officer on clinical grounds, or the disease cannot be ruled out and further actions will be taken. For quality assurance purposes, a telephone report will be made from the farm by the investigating officer to one of the veterinary officers in Vendu in London, and after going through the details of the clinical picture and disease history, a decision will be made if disease is not suspected and can be negated, in which case the restrictions will be lifted and you will be directed to seek advice from your private veterinary surgeon, or the disease cannot be ruled out and samples will be taken and sent to the lab. The number and the nature of samples may vary and will be based on the advice received primarily from Vendu, but it will depend on the species of the birds on site, indicator species versus non-indicator species, but other factors could be taken into consideration when sampling. These samples will be sent by courier from the farm directly to APHA laboratory in Weybridge, and after arrival at the lab, a PCR test will be done and results will be normally available within 24 hours from samples being taken. If the results are negative and a further virus isolation test at 2 days confirms it, we will inform you about the outcome. Restrictions will then be lifted and investigation will end, and that's after 2 days. In the event of the result being positive, as well as the virus isolation at 2 days, we'll have preliminary results, and a further test at 6 days will be done, having final results. Therefore, a definite answer on the presence of or absence of the disease on your farm will be around 6 days following the on-farm investigation. However, APHA will take actions after the preliminary results are available, and once the Chief Veterinary Officer is content, we will then proceed to organize the evaluation of your stock no sooner than 24 hours before culling the remainder of the birds on site. This valuation is done taking into consideration how many birds are dead, ill, or look healthy at the time of the assessment, because compensation is only payable for the birds that look healthy at the time of this valuation. Culling is performed humanely under the supervision of one of the APHA vets to ensure that the welfare of birds is not compromised, because regardless of how fast we would like to deal with the case, the welfare of your birds is paramount until the very end. The disposal of the dead poultry and any other poultry products will be dealt by APHA, and the final step from the delivery point of view is the preliminary cleansing and disinfection, which normally is performed by one of the technical officers of PHA, followed by a written report after 24 hours have elapsed. The follow-up procedures will be discussed with the allocated vet for your premises and will entail secondary cleansing and disinfection at your expense. Restrictions will only be lifted after APHA allocated vet is satisfied with the procedures. So as soon as you action the secondary cleaning procedures, the better. Next slide, please. Differential diagnosis on negated cases. Well, once a notifiable disease is ruled out after the initial investigation, you have the option in liaison with your private veterinary surgeon to submit additional samples to investigate other possible conditions or request differential testing, this time at your expense. Because once there is a suspicion of disease, it's treated as a report case, and the testing costs are incurred by APHA. In this case, is going to be at your expense. However, these tests will give a great surveillance value, but would also give a great benefit to bird health and welfare by knowing the causing agent in time. So in case, when applicable, the treatment can start as soon as possible. But you also can send carcasses for post-mortem inspection at APHA veterinary investigation centers, normally last way, but other third-party providers can be used once you access the link in the slide. The costs of testing will be applied irrespective of the results and are subject to be reviewed and available on the APHA site. In case, in liaison with your private vet, there is a suspicion of a different disease lurking around, we advise you to contact the avian expert group via the email address provided and discuss any individual case. Well, there's some misconceptions and unfounded rumors circulating on the mass social media platforms and other groups, and we would like to assure you that there is no automatic culling policy for avian influenza outbreaks in the UK. So don't be afraid to report to APHA any suspicion of the disease, because birds will only be culled if avian influenza is confirmed following a veterinary investigation on the flock and following the laboratory testing of the samples taken from your flock. Or if a veterinary risk assessment indicates that there is a strong likelihood that the premises keeping birds has significant links to a different infected premises where the disease has already been present. These links could be done via movement of birds, poultry products, people, equipment, vehicles, or anything that has been shared in between those two premises. Please note that the most premises in the 3-kilometer protection zone, for example, will receive a veterinary inspection only to provide reassurance that the birds are fit and healthy. However, it might be a possibility that sample of the waterfowl could be taken, as these birds often do not show signs of infection, but could be still carrying the virus into your flock. Further details can be found on Notifiable Avian Disease Control Strategy for Great Britain, which can be found on gov.uk. And the following slide provides, again, valuable information regarding APHA links or documents that can help you in case you have suspect avian influenza on your flock. Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for joining the webinar.